Hi there, and welcome to onlinebookreview.org. I'm your host, Stacey Cochran, and we are joined today by author Kris Jackson, who is the author of Above the Fray. Thank you very much for joining us here on a Skype interview, Kris.
Yes.
Well, let's talk a little bit about Above the Fray. First, what can you tell our audience about the book?
Well, it's a historical novel. It's based on the Union Balloon Corps in the Civil War. It was the world's first Air Force. It's something I'd heard about back as far as grade school, but I was interested in it, started researching it on the internet a couple of years ago, and was finding all sorts of interesting things like, I had questions like, how did they fill the balloon? They filled it with hydrogen, but where do you get hydrogen on a Civil War battlefield? And also, they ran telegraph lines directly from the balloons so they could watch over what was happening on the battlefield and report to the commanders, and in fact report back to Lincoln and Washington in real time as to what was happening in the battle. And I thought that was very interesting. And then something else I found that was extremely interesting was that after a year and a half of doing this, and with great success, they stopped doing it. And if it was so successful, why on earth would you throw away a very valuable tool like that? And the more I researched it, the more links I found to this and that all over the place, and it turned into a novel.
So what explanation did you find for why they actually discontinued using the balloons?
Well, the major reason seems to be that the Balloon Corps was a civilian agency. They were all civilians in it, and the aeronauts, as they were called, they tended to be quirky Indiana Jones type people. They were good at the geek stuff, but they were looking for adventure, and they did not fit into the disciplined military hierarchy. And the military didn't like them and was never able to cope with them properly. Not only that, but there was a very different attitude among the high-ranking military of the day. They believed that warfare should consist of brave men standing on a field blasting away at each other until everybody was dead on one side. And to do things like sneak around and peek in on the enemy and see what they were doing, invading his privacy this way, was dishonorable. And they couldn't justify it in those means.
So it was seen as kind of, it was sort of seen the same way that the Revolutionary War saw folks, using strategies like hiding in the woods to shoot. They saw that as dishonorable. It sounds
exactly. Yes, it was a very similar thing. It's the military faces a paradigm shift, and you see it today with things like fighting an insurgency.
Sure.
We started out not knowing how to do that in Iraq and Afghanistan. It was similar in a way to this.
Now let's talk a little bit about your decision to break the book into two different parts. You've broken this book into two different parts. Can you explain your decision there?
Well, I had always had it as part one and part two as I was writing it, and I sort of did that just to keep the file size down a little bit. But when I was setting up with print on demand, which is I'm doing through Craig's Press, I found that the book was something like 700 pages long, and since they charge for the number of pages, I meant the final book would cost something like $32, and for an unknown author,
sure,
nobody's going to spend that much for a book. Now, so I split it into two pieces.
Now, speaking of like different kinds of ways of publishing a book and distributing the book, of course, the thing that a lot of folks are very excited about is this new Amazon Kindle version of the book, and reading books on digital readers like the Kindle and the Sony e-reader. Can you explain a little bit about the thought process that you went through to arrive at saying, okay, I want to publish this book on the Amazon Kindle?
Well, I'm a member of the Independent Authors Group, and I get about 20 or 30 emails a day from them and answer a fair number of them. They send messages to everybody in the group, and one of the questions going around was, what about this Kindle business? Is this really worthwhile? And someone replied and said that about 2/3 of his sales are done through Kindle these days. And I found that remarkable, so I immediately signed up. I think that Kindle is a fascinating technology. Of course, Sony and others have come out with e-readers over the years, and none of them have caught on. But the Kindle really looks like it's going great guns.
It definitely has some momentum, and I think Amazon has always been kind of groundbreaking in the publishing business for the past 15 or 20 years. It's a very exciting time. Well, let's turn it back towards sort of the writing of Above the Fray. Again, for folks tuning in, watching the interview, the author is Kris Jackson. The book is Above the Fray. What aspect of writing Above the Fray, Kris, did you enjoy the most?
I think what I enjoyed the most was assuming a 19th century voice. It seemed appropriate to do that, and so I found myself using a lot of words that wouldn't be used today, like Negro. Mm-hmm. That was the proper term for a black person in those days, and so many words have very different meanings today, like queer. Queer meant odd. It looked like a stage from some sort of queer play, and as I kept researching, kept reading material from the time period, I kept finding more and more interesting word usage. The other thing that I found most fun was to take actual historical characters and use them. Robert E. Lee is in there quite a bit, and there's a number of scenes with Lincoln. And of course, we can all see Lincoln. I mean, if Lincoln walked into the room, we'd all recognize him as being Abraham Lincoln. So it's a little bit dangerous as a writer to do this. You can't have the guy do something that Lincoln wouldn't do.
Sure.
But I kept at it, and it was a lot of fun to do.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that. That raises an interesting point. How did you set up the story fictionally, knowing that you had specific battles and specific real-life people? How did you walk the balance between writing a fictional story and writing a story that's nonfiction, essentially?
Well, with historical fiction, I think that there's an interesting division that you can make. Well, one of the rules of writing fiction is don't tell, show.
Sure.
And however, there's a lot of times in the story when I would want to actually describe something that was happening that wasn't part of what happened to my character. I would find myself telling in that situation rather than showing it. If he was actually in a battle, then I would describe it from his point of view, which would sometimes be very narrow.
Well, and that's a great point too. I think if you've got a lot of research, as I was imagining this, as I was putting together the questions here, I was thinking, well, there would be a temptation to want to, put too much information in, and like you just said, Kris, tell too much rather than really using your imagination and getting into the story. And it sounds like you managed to balance that really well.
Well, there's two novels that I would cite as contrasts here. One of them is Gone with the Wind, which is an excellent novel. People are more familiar with the movie. And the other is Herman Wouk's World War II series, The Winds of War and War and Remembrance. Gone with the Wind, Margaret Mitchell had a very good feeling for the history because she interviewed a lot of people, particularly women from the time period who were still alive in the 1930s, and a lot of former slaves and Civil War veterans who were still around. But she didn't really present much in the way of actual history. Herman Wouk's novels, on the other hand, he created a fictional German who wrote a history of the war at the end of it and cited long passages from this fictional author, and put in a lot of the nuts and bolts of the story. And and there'd be long passages, pages at a time sometimes, of this guy von Roon describing what happened in this particular set of battles, and then it would switch over again and you'd see the characters living through it. So he would have specifically tell and show segments in the story, and I liked that. My approach was sort of halfway between that.
How long did it take you to write the book?
I started it in 2001. I pretty much finished it in 2004, sent it out to a couple of agents for review, and was really slammed by them. And that caused me to go back, look at the thing, and see that I had sort of written it serially. I started writing at the beginning and wrote it through to the end and stopped. And it was incoherent. Mm-hmm. So I went back into it and did rewrite after rewrite after rewrite, some of which almost continues today. Although at some point you have to draw the line and say, no, this thing is finished.
Sure.
So I'd say from 2001 until basically a few weeks ago.
What would you say about history? What is it about history that fascinates you so much, would you say?
History is what we are. Mm-hmm. History is where we've been, whether we recognize it or not. And I think the greatest, the most traumatic, and the most formative period of American history was that period 1861 to 65, the war.
Mm-hmm. Now, how did you compile your research? It sounds like you did just a ton of research to ground yourself to be able to write the book. How did you compile it? Did you just have books all stacked around, or how did you compile your research?
Just about 0 books. That's a bit startling. I remember there was something, I believe it was Goethe, who said in order to write one book, you have to read 10 books. Mm-hmm. But just about all of my research was done on the internet. I did have some help from a gentleman whose name escapes me at the Air and Space Museum in Washington. And he sent me some things like microfilm of the director of the Corps' notes and things like that, which was helpful. But mostly it was internet. I had a lot of bookmarks, and to a great extent, I just remembered things. I can discuss the Civil War and I can discuss the Union Balloon Corps to an extent that would drive anyone crazy.
Fascinating. Well, I've got one more question for you, and then I'm going to do a lead out, and then we can chat a little bit sort of off the record here. What advice would you give to writers who are in our audience watching the interview? What advice would you give them about writing their own books?
First of all, do it. This is the greatest advice for anybody in any sort of arts or creative stuff, is even if you're not that good at it, the only way to find where the good stuff is to just do it. And I look at my early writing and early artwork, and it's really awful. But if I had known that at the time, I might have stopped. Fortunately, I didn't, and kept on, and have gotten someone good at it. Look at stuff that other people have done. Find out what you like, what you don't like. Read passages of other people's books aloud. Rewrite them. And someone wrote a sequel to Gone with the Wind recently, and she started out by handwriting like 3/4 of the original book, just to get a feel of how Margaret Mitchell put words together.
That's discipline.
That is.
Well, very cool. Thank you very much, Kris, for chatting with us today here at the Online Book Review. To find out more of our interviews, of course, visit us online at onlinebookreview.org. I'm your host, Stacey Cochran. Thanks so much for tuning in. Thank you.